Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Thank you very much for joining us all here at the EU Institute for Security Studies to discuss, as you can see there, 10 ideas for the new team. This publication that we've launched last week, if I try to summarize what really are the watchwords, what really are the essence of it, I would say a sense of urgency and a sense and the need for agency. So urgency and agency, I think, are sort of what may guide us this morning. These days in Brussels, there are many reports, and we are only one, I believe, in a longer series. And many of these reports, they underline the sense of Europe losing ground. Yeah? And you heard Draghi last week talking particularly in the domain of economic competitiveness. This morning we're going to talk about Europe's geopolitical role, and perhaps also in that domain Europe faces really quite a number of challenges, and the capacity to cope with these challenges is not at the place where it should be. This is the starting point in terms of our diagnosis as we see it here at the EU Institute. But we also want to counter the notion of fatalism, psychology of weakness, that the sense that it's all too complicated and there's frankly nothing to be done, and that we are indeed condemned to this path that Mario Draghi described as slow agony. What can we do to counter this situation? So that was a little bit the exam question that the team at the EU Institute put to itself. What can we do about it? And we put on the table a set, as you know, of 10 ideas. They all follow a similar structure. They're very short essays, they're little capsules. What's the definition of the problem? What is the proposed solution that we suggest? But also, what's the cost of inaction? What will happen if we stay on the course where we are today? And this has produced a triptych, three sets of ideas on new ways of thinking, new ways of acting, and new ways of working. I hoped to have a clicker, but if I don't have that, I would ask maybe the colleagues to give the next slide. There you go. This is the program of this morning. I will run you through the full set of ideas. Then later on you will hear from three of my brilliant colleagues at the Institute who will give elevator pitches on their ideas. And then we're going to have reactions and comments from Secretary General of the External Action Service, Stefano Sannino, Sophie in 't Veld, a very prominent former MEP. We'll talk about the politics of it all, and Ben Hall, the Europe editor of the Financial Times, in which there was an op-ed last week also on this report. So that's, if you like, the program that we have for you this morning, and then we're going to have, of course, interaction with you and discuss together what you make of these ideas, how feasible or not, how to put them in action or not, and what you make of it. But let's run through the ideas very, very quickly. The first idea that we propose is that a sharper and better and stronger European global role in a harsher world, it first of all requires dropping outdated ways of thinking, dropping things that no longer work, whether mental constructs or whether it's to do with policy frameworks that have served their purpose but no longer are adequate to the world of today. And a key example, in our view, is the concept of the European neighborhood policy, which was a brilliant idea at its time, but the world has moved on. And this idea of grouping together East and South, maybe even its label, European neighborhood. You tell other countries you're a neighbor of the European Union. It's a very Eurocentric concept. We put ourselves at the center and you fit around us. Well, maybe that's not how other countries see themselves. So we say maybe it's time to move beyond the European neighborhood policy, and in both East and South need much more targeted solutions, much more tailored ways of thinking. There's much more competition in our neighborhood these days than there was when the neighborhood was conceived. Turkey, China, Russia, Gulf players, depending on where you look. So we make the case for a much more tailored approach, both in the South but also in the East. Next slide, please. All these graphs, incidentally, you find them in the pamphlet, in the report you have on your seat. Also in the East, we say clearly there's a need for strategic reasons to accelerate the enlargement framework. You'll hear more about that in a moment, with the Western Balkans, of course with Ukraine and with Moldova, and with Georgia we hope. But there's also there a need to recalibrate and redynamize our offer and move to perhaps a slightly less state-centric approach and a greater focus on resilience, the power of attraction, and civil society as well. And civil society, how to support civil society in places where the screws of authoritarian governments are turning upwards and make it increasingly difficult. And I think we all know individual cases of that. Go to another idea, a new way of thinking, and this sort of idea of ditching outdated or illusions or what have you. We plead for a no illusions stance when it comes to China and its relationship with Russia. In this graph, you see a sort of evolution of the numerous calls that European leaders, presidents of councils, commissions, individual countries have made towards the Chinese leadership, saying that we see the future of EU-China relations in function of China's choices on Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. And they have made these pleas for many, many times, but the fact of the matter is that these calls have not been heeded. And we see an increasing strategic convergence of China and Russia, and we see that China has chosen not to deny Russia the high-tech products that it is using to continue its aggression. So I think we argue for a realistic approach when it comes to China. That doesn't mean that there can be no cooperation with China. Of course, there should be cooperation with China, but we should be clear-eyed about the degree to which we have influence or not over that kind of choices that China will make, and formulate our policies accordingly. Idea number 4, next slide please. It's an idea that I developed. The origin, the problem, if you like, is that these days everything is security, and security is everything. So we all know analytically, and we repeat day after day in articles and speeches, that technology and cyber and energy and migration and all of this is security policy. And we know that European citizens are very worried and want to be protected. But in our system, we still treat all these subjects as slightly separate. And we have not really succeeded in bringing this world of foreign and security policy in a successful enough way to the European Council. The European Council is the sort of the analogy that I use. If you like, it's the nuclear power station of the European Union. It's the greatest concentration of political power we have in Europe, but it's disconnected from the grid. And we need to find ways in which we connect the power to the grid. And make European leaders, it's Chefsache, what they say in Germany, it's Chefsache, security, Chefsache. But leaders today in the European Council, if we're honest, when they deal with these matters, it's mostly to move commas in a paragraph on the crisis of the day. It's not really, and we'll hear in a moment what Stefano makes of that, well, it's not really in a sort of strategic manner. So we need to give ourselves the means to do that. And a suggestion is for maybe the first day of every European summit to really be dedicated to this total field of security and defense and matters where you make all these connections. Only prime ministers can do that. And it's interesting to note that at the national level, the answer that people have given themselves for this problem of integrated security and how do we organize is building national security councils, national security advices. In many EU countries, we have these officials. In the EU, not so much. So maybe we can think a little bit in those terms, and perhaps the High Representative, Vice President, can use her treaty-based seat in the European Council a bit in that spirit, that she presents also as Vice President of the Commission the sort of policy packages for leaders, her cabinet, for decision, and putting leaders in front of their responsibilities also. They would have to take these decisions. And it will require a new way of thinking and a new way of working that we believe would be helpful to get to the kinds of strategic decisions at the top political, because that's where it resides. And that's also where it's blocked, oftentimes. Let's move on to another idea. Next slide. Western Balkans and enlargement. In our view, enlargement is fundamental. We cannot afford another 20 years of stagnation, as we've seen, but we'll hear from my colleague Bojana Zorić in a moment the precise, let's say, elevator pitch that she'll make. Let's go to idea number 6. There it is. It's a very complicated graph, but a very beautiful one. But the core idea behind this is that we live in a world of rising powers that want a greater voice, a greater say in how the world is run, but that also want greater partnerships. And they have more choices for partnerships. Everybody knows this phrase, the battle of offers, the battle of offers. Okay, battle of offers sounds very good, but we have to position ourselves in a position where we can put stronger, bigger, better offers on the table. Now, the idea that we had is a bit of a gimmick, but to give you a thought, is a DG rising, in the sense that we have developing countries that require a certain approach. Then you have accession countries and countries, candidate countries. And then there are countries like Mexico and Indonesia and Brazil and Turkey and all these places that want partnerships. And some want more digital partnerships and other want on renewable energy. And we need to, as EU, be better at formulating these packages. Other countries are very good. I'm not myself so much favor in this phrase of transactionalism, which is très à la mode. I like partnerships better. Transactionalism is about doing deals. It's about a deal we do today. You give me this, I give you that. Partnerships is about a future we build together. But yes, we need to get better at playing that game. Let's go to another idea. Next one. This is on rethinking our CSDP missions. We will plead for a more focused approach to get more results, because the gap between the means that we have and the goals that we set is significant, and we need to rethink that. And Joel Andersson in a moment will explain that idea. We also, next slide please, we have an idea on Ukraine. Everybody knows Ukraine is fundamental to our European security, our own security. We need to do more of everything, despite it getting more difficult, on the financial support, on the air defense, on the energy sector, on all sorts of things, but also on training. And Giuseppe Spatafora will tell you in a moment how that looks in his perspective. Final 2 ideas, and I'll end up there. We wanted to draw your attention to the Baltic states, and in particular their vulnerability not only to, let's say, scenarios of Russian potential attacks, but also their energy vulnerability and the need to shore up the energy resilience of the Baltic states, and in particular the role of innovative technologies in how to achieve that, and how what the EU does in that space can complement what NATO will have to do in the field of territorial defense. And then finally, final slide, Taiwan, and preventing possible wars or other serious security scenarios in East Asia. We all know that around Taiwan and that wider region, it's really sort of the epicenter of the global concentration of high-end technology, and especially high-end semiconductors. What happens there will have a direct and immediate effect on global security, and including Europeans. This is not a faraway theater that is irrelevant to the European Union. This is of direct relevance also to the European Union. Tensions are rising fast. Military expenditure is rising fast. We see exercises, Chinese exercises that are getting closer to it. We hear the rhetoric, and we need to think about this as Europeans on what all this means for ourselves as well. And here the argument is, again, it'll be for the US to lead the deterrence on the military side. That is clear. It's not within the reach or the means of the European Union to play a leading role on that. But we need to think about what all this means from an economic and a broader technological security perspective for the EU. So we need to do a mapping of what are the most critical dependencies that we have today as European Union in that sphere and develop counting measures, but also develop this idea of a reverse dependencies. Because China is also dependent on EU supplies in some critical domains. And this goes to this point of psychological weakness. Sometimes debate on this file limit itself exclusively to what European dependencies are on Chinese export. But there are also reverse dependencies. And we need to raise this also to a higher level, perhaps even at the level of European leaders who need to think about this. So there you have it, 10 ideas. We believe ambitious, we recognize. There inevitably will be people say, yeah, but what about this and what about that? Our job is to put the ideas on the table. And I think first I'm going to ask my colleagues, Bojana, Giuseppe, and Joel to elaborate a little bit on their ideas before going to the reactions. Please. We're going to start with Bojana, please.
Yes. So, enlargement must happen. And I'm not just talking about Ukraine and Moldova, but about the Western Balkans. 20 plus years of stagnation. We cannot proceed like this. But how exactly do we reignite the process when we know that support for enlargement is fading within the EU? 35% of support in France, 42% in Germany. And meanwhile, in the Balkans, enlargement stalemate has resulted in growing dissatisfaction, impatience, rampant state capture, and weakening of democracy. So how do we unblock this? My proposal is through gradual integration, by opening the doors to CFSP, to those candidates that have demonstrated willingness and discipline. Let's invite them to Foreign Affairs Council. No to veto and voting rights until full membership takes place, but yes to official statements and consultations, particularly on issues of importance for the region. Why don't we start by bringing them into foreign policy world? Because if we don't do that, then we are risking to see more of setbacks in democratic transition, more of ethno-nationalism, disjoint efforts in border security and other security-related issues that are jointly shared by the region and the EU. We are to see further erosion of public trust and support in pro-EU parties and European forces in the region. And we will see more of Russia and China. So by bringing these countries into CFSP, we galvanize the enlargement. This is the way to counter the stalemate, but also to strengthen the EU itself. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Bojana. Thanks a lot. We now go to the next idea, which is Joel's plea for a more restrictive, selective, focused approach to missions and operations. Joel.
Thank you, Stephen. So yes, CSDP missions and operations. So for 20 years, the EU has deployed these missions and operations around the world, but they often been rather small and with limited lasting impact, arguably. So at the time then of rising conflicts around the world, we still need to be staying globally engaged. And the EU rapid deployment capacity of 5,000 troops that will be ready next year, together then with the 200 mission specialists for civilian missions that we also committed to be able to deploy, gives the Union some means to do just that. But given then the mixed record of previous missions and operations and the limited resources at hand, the EU must be more selective in its crisis management. So in my view, this means fewer missions and operations and focusing more on core European interests. And what are those? As a global actor, the EU needs to act at home first, right? So without a secure and stable neighborhood, the Union cannot credibly provide security globally. This means focusing on our neighborhood, Ukraine, Moldova, but also the wider neighborhood, including the Western Balkans. This is also where we have most possibility to succeed, where we have the ability to raise the resources from our member states, and most importantly, the political buy-in from those partner countries that want to join the Union. Now, the EU is also a globally trading power, and therefore needs to be maritime, focused on maritime security as well. So this means maintaining and even increasing then our maritime security, including then operations like ASPIDES. So then, to conclude, we need to stay globally focused, but we need to focus our resources on our core interests. This does not, however, mean that the EU leaves the world. We have many other instruments and tools, but for the CSDP, we need to focus more. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Jan-Joel. And now we're going to hear from Giuseppe Spatafora on his ideas for support to Ukraine.
Thank you, Stephen. The question I would like to ask today is how do we, Europeans or the EU, or both, put Ukraine in a strong negotiating position or in a position to win the war? The key is to threaten credibly the Russian hold on territory that it currently controls in occupied Ukraine. And I'm afraid that today, Ukraine lacks that credible capability. Since 2023, when Ukraine tried to breach Russian defenses and fortification, it didn't manage to go through. And on our side, how do we equip them? We've given them weapons, but my argument is that weapons are not enough. Even removing all restrictions will not be enough for this. What Ukrainians need is massive training to large scale to be able to mount successive operations against the Russian occupiers. And current training that we are providing has two problems, which mostly emerge, as you see from the map, that it's basically from the fact that they're training abroad. And that has a problem of scale. The EU has trained 60,000 Ukrainian soldiers, 75,000 by the end of the year, which is a remarkable achievement considering where we started. But the Ukrainian army is 1.2 million soldiers. And in addition to that, there are 500,000 new recruits this year alone. So the needs are enormous. The second problem is that training carried out from abroad is not always applicable to the reality of the war that Ukraine is facing. And we've seen that from Ukraine's own report on the training. What is the solution? Well, the EU has broken, and Europeans have broken many taboos in the past 3 years. I suggest we break another taboo and provide training inside Ukraine. That would have three main benefits. First is scale. We would be able to train a much larger number of troops at a much faster pace. Second is tailoring. We would be able to adapt the training to the realities of this war and improve communication with the Ukrainians. And third, and that's crucial, is political signal. The EU is ready, or Europeans are ready to do whatever it takes to support Ukraine. This is particularly important in light of the uncertainty surrounding the future of American support to Ukraine. So let's step up. What if we don't do it? If we don't break this taboo, then Ukraine will not be able to conquer significant territory. The Donbass is not Kursk. And Russia would be in a strong position to dictate the terms of an eventual ceasefire. It will be able to dictate an unjust peace that rewards aggression and that encourages future aggression. And consequently, this is not just a moral imperative, it is essential for European security. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, there you have it, everyone. A full set with elaboration on those three particular ideas. I suggest my colleagues swap places again with the front row, and I now invite Secretary General Sannino, Sophie in 't Veld, and Ben Holt to join me here on stage to get a few reactions, because yes, the purpose of the Institute, as I mentioned at the beginning, we are required to think about the problems of the world, but also come with solutions. And we want to generate debates on those solutions. I'm very fortunate that we have three, I think, very well-placed colleagues to do so. We have Stefano Sannino, a man who's presently Secretary General of the EEAS, but I particularly admire him because he's looked at this project, EU foreign policy, from multiple vantage points, from the point of view of the Council, the Member States, in Coreper, in the Commission, now in the EEAS. There are very few people in Europe who have observed us and know us so well, both the potential, and I think we share a passion to make it work better, but also, let's say, the difficulties of making it all work. So I look forward to your comments in a moment. Then I'm very glad we have Sophie in 't Veld, a very seasoned politician, because we are acutely aware that all this is happening at a time of supreme political challenges in Europe at the societal level, at the member state level, at the European level, where politically everything gets more complicated by the day, and that conditions, right, the capacity of the system to deliver solutions in line of what some of our report is advocating. And then we have Ben Hall, a former colleague of mine many years ago from the Central European Forum in London. Now, of course, the Europe editor of the Financial Times. And I very much look forward to Ben giving his... he's a very shrewd observer of European politics, and has written a lot about that. And he has a sort of a radar also for, let's say, when people say nonsense or very pie in the sky. So he has that, you know, he has that frame of mind. So I look forward to what Ben will have to offer. But let's go first to Stefano. What do you think?
Now, the challenge is to try to put together a number of elements that I had in mind with your own presentation, which is a little bit destabilizing, but I will try all the same. Let's start from one of your previous papers, which was about the contestation, which I think was one of the key words to describe the world in which we live today. We spoke a lot about fragmentation, we spoke a lot about polarization, all is true, but it is true that we live in a world which is contested in every possible way, in every part of the world, which is giving you the sense that essentially all the balances, the equilibrium that we had known up until now have gone. And we are living in a sort of sea where there are no points of reference, except one that you have mentioned, Stephen, which is the growing alliance between China and Russia, which is something which is now becoming something extremely visible. Then let's hope that also the transatlantic alliance will continue to be as solid as it has been in the past. Second point, I think that the big crisis that we are going through, I think we have gone through, the European Union and the world has gone through a number of crises. We were speaking yesterday about perma-crisis. But the crisis that the European Union has gone through with the Russian aggression against Ukraine has a sort of existential component, much, let's say, I would say, stronger than the others, because it's touching our own security. Now, security is a different concept if you are living in the Baltics countries, or if you're living in Italy or in Spain. So but there is an existential threat, and this has essentially triggered a reflection within the European institutions of a different quality, I would say, and of a different nature compared with all the other crises we have gone through, including the COVID crisis in a way, which was, again, also existential, but of a different nature. There is a sense of, for us, I would say, of what to do. There are choices to be made. On COVID, we were essentially obliged to follow a certain path. Here, there are choices to be made, and this is making things more difficult and more challenging. And that's why I think that it is a good choice that this commission has decided to put very much security at the heart of its own action. Security in the broad sense, military security, hard security, but also economic security, and we'll come speak about China essentially, and the whole of society security, resilience. And that is also the element of competitiveness that you were mentioning before. It's not by chance, I would say, that both the Letta and the Draghi report are pointing at the defense aspect as one of the key elements that we need to look at for our future. And then there is a third element, which is, honestly, we have to call things by their name, which has been, there again, triggered by Ukraine, and that's the enlargement. I think that the enlargement process is back on track. It's something that we had lost in the past few years. I'm very glad that there is a decision to have a commissioner for enlargement, not for the neighborhood, which I agree with you, it's a very vague concept. So a commissioner for enlargement that will be focusing on the negotiations for enlargement, because that's something that has been missing. And I think that from that point of view, allow me to make one comment on this. This will be the sort of test case of the goodwill, not only of the European Union, and there is a lot for us because we need to look at the budget, we need to look at the way we work, we need to look at a number of elements which are very existential, and I think that the work has started, but we'll also look at and we'll see the willingness of countries to join. I think that you were mentioning when I first CSDP, CFSP, I think it's a very good indicator of the position of countries when it comes to the European Union. And if you look at the rate of alignment, and I won't go into this because I don't want to name names, but if you look at the rate of alignment, you will discover who is really feel part of the European Union and who is just playing with it. So it will be a way of understanding also who is serious, because we have pretended to enlarge, other countries have pretended that wanted to become member of the European Union, but not everywhere the will is present. But again, I mean, we will see how this is going to happen. I think that the concept of gradual integration is very important. Honestly, I don't think that it's only about foreign policy, about CFSP, CSDP. It's also about programs. It's also about potentially becoming part of certain parts of the internal market, how you align. I mean, there are also we have the European Economic Area, which is aligned perfectly. It's part of the story, but it's so. I mean, but the point of the gradual integration, I think it's very important because it's not a sort of 0-1, no? When you do nothing for many years and then all of a sudden you have everything. So you have a gradual element of integration. And I think also, to be honest, that the growth plan for the Western Balkans is also a good thing. It would be good to make it sure that it's accompanying also reform processes, a little bit like we are doing in Ukraine. But I think it's a good element to help the development of these countries. There is one element that I think will continue to be very central for the coming years. I don't know how many. It will depend on many things, which is Ukraine. I think that we need to continue to stay focused on Ukraine. We cannot think that this is done more or less, then something will come, and then in any case, and it's what we will do and what we will be able to do in Ukraine will be the test case of our capacity to act in the world. And when I hear from the other side of the Atlantic, the idea that we cannot do Ukraine anymore because we have to focus on China, I really am puzzled. Because I don't understand how we can be credible in China if we are not determined in Ukraine. Absolutely. And I think that this is something that we need to really talk very seriously with our American friends. Ukraine is, I think that I have read in your article that is the most consequential issue for EU security. I think you're right, it is. I was mentioning before, this is not just about a generic threat, it's about what can happen in our member states and what could happen tomorrow, not in 20 years' time. That's why we have to be very serious about what we do with Russia. We have to continue the work on deterrence. And we need to be very serious about, and I wouldn't object to your idea of having, Giuseppe, of having training in Ukraine, but it's my personal point of view. member states, our member states are still discussing this point, as they are discussing the possibility of using our armaments outside the Ukrainian territory, so into the Russian territory. This is also something, a discussion which is still going on. I do understand that not everybody wants to make this decision public, but I think that, and you are right in saying that we need to give a signal of our determination of our deterrence. I was mentioning before, and I will come back to this point, the no limits partnership between Russia and China. This is something which is, again, it's serious stuff. It's changing the paradigm of that we have, in which we have been working for many decades. This partnership, this cooperation goes beyond the simple support, the dual-use things, or the support to the economy, or buying cheap oil. There is something more, and the cooperation that looks like be existing between China and Russia in the military sector, it's something that is a game changer from many points of view. And that's why I think that it is impossible to separate the security theaters. It is impossible to think the Euro-Atlantic security without thinking at the Indo-Pacific security, and vice versa. And there is an element of, and you see what is happening even in the most remote, I mean, no negative judgment about this. I mean, what is happening in the Solomon Islands has become extremely relevant from the strategic point of view. Australia, New Zealand, they are discovering they are no longer in their sort of nice cocoon at bay of all the risks. There is the problems are everywhere, and what is happening in the South China Sea, what is happening in the Straits of Taiwan, it's something that is relevant for all of us. It's relevant economically, no doubt about that. It's relevant strategically, but it's also relevant politically, because it's about how the future world will look like. I don't think that we will manage to convince everybody to live our way, but honestly, I don't want others to determine how I live. And that's something that I feel quite strongly, honestly. I'm not going to go too much into the competitiveness element, but one component, one element that I want to stress is about the economic security, because it's very much linked also to what we were saying with China. There is one element, and we really, I mean, we've spoken a lot with the Chinese, because at the end of the day, the point is not about, let's say, decoupling from China, neither economically nor politically. I've spoken a lot about China, but everything boils down about trust. Do we trust or not? Do we trust that the situation of monopoly for many critical raw material, especially in the processing part, do we trust that the dependence that we have in a number of sectors economically is not going to be used tomorrow against us? Do we believe that the economic coercion that has been used against Lithuania cannot be applied also elsewhere? Do you think that we are at the bay of any risk of this? And that's the real question that we need to ask ourselves, and that's why I fully agree with you when you were saying that we need to be with eyes wide open when we, again, and that's our policy. We engage, we have to manage this relationship, there is no doubt about that. We have to engage with China whenever it is possible, but we have also to be able to de-risk from China, and I would say also it's a little bit, if I say with a softer voice, deter China a little bit. It's in a number of areas, because otherwise it will be difficult to survive. The one point that you have made, Stephen, which I think it's also in these 10 ideas, which I think it's very important, is about the new way of working with our partners. And when I speak about our partners, and I fully subscribe to your definition, I'm not thinking only about our like-minded partners, which is very important, by the way, and we should take care of them. It's something that we should be a little bit more strategic also when we deal with the countries like the UK or like Japan or South Korea or Australia and so on. But we need also to work with all our partners around the world, and potentially everybody's a partner. Exactly because for what you were saying, because now everybody is trying to understand, it's not transactional, it's just to understand which is the best offer that I have on the table, which is the best perspective that I can get. And we need to be able there to be credible in the way we work. I don't believe too much in proliferations of DGs. I mean, it's not because I don't like the Commission. On the contrary, I like it very much. I believe much more in the integration between the work of the Commission and the work of the External Action Service. And there I think that this is a challenge for us, collectively. It's a challenge for the Commission. It is a challenge also for the External Action Service. Because, and I will be very blunt, I'm sorry, I see a lot of colleagues around the table, we just cannot behave like a sort of political cell of a political think tank. We are cannot just analyze things. At a certain point, we have to produce, let's say, ideas, and we just cannot complain if someone else has an idea and tries to implement it, because it does not come from us. So we will need to rethink also a little bit. We will see with the new High Representative how she sees this, but we will need to rethink maybe also the way we work internally and the way we work with the Commission. Let's look at not only at the portfolios. I think that by now all of you have checked your and seen the attribution of portfolios. Let's see the mission letters, and because it's very important to see how this structure then is implemented, and if we can really move into a different dynamic in the work we do together. And that will be important for what you were saying, Stephen, about the future and about how to work with key partners, how to create partnerships that are mutually beneficial and that are giving the sense of a common future. We have started a little bit, maybe in a stranger way. I mean, we did the action plans when, with a number of countries around the world. Now we have started to implement some of this. Again, perfection is not there, but we can do much better. And we have done also, I think, something else that you also mentioned that is interesting in this very attractive graphics about minilateralism and about the idea of creating also a mechanism of cooperation between a more limited number of countries. Which does not mean that we have to undermine multilateralism. Let's be clear. That still remains a very strong anchor of the work that we are doing, and still remain essentially the arena in which we need to work. But there too, we need to be honest with ourselves. I mean, the multilateralism, the multilateral system that we have created 60, 70 years ago, is no longer serving the purpose. And it's quite interesting to see the dynamic of the shift of power and of political attention from the Security Council to the General Assembly, which is a signal of the fact that essentially the world is a little bit bigger than 15 countries around a small table, because you need much more than that. So we need to listen to countries which are asking for more representation in terms of world governance, for more support for the policies that we are determining, financing for development, finance for climate change, and so on. And maybe, I know that it's not very popular, especially in this moment, about migration. and how we handle the migration issue, which is also another important part of this story. So that's the another important point. One final word, because I don't want to monopolize the discussion. One final word on your, I would say, governance suggestion about the Council for Defense. You are right in saying that the European Council is the big concentration of power in the European Union. There is no doubt about that. I object a little bit to the idea that the only thing that they do is to change commas in paragraph. Sometimes they are stuck also in this, which is not the most exciting moment. But there are moments where, honestly, discussion is very, very solid and very, very interesting. I've seen, and honestly, having the, I don't know if the privilege or the pleasure or whatever, of sitting in that room, very substantial discussions, substantial discussions when we had to take a decision how to deal with the Russian attack against Ukraine. Very substantial discussion when it comes to migration. Very substantial discussion when it comes to the Middle East peace process. Very substantial discussion about competitiveness, about climate change, about the political life of our country. So it's not only a boring and bureaucratic exercise. I mean, there are moments when the European Council gets the acts together and is able to determine a political line. And I think that it is a good thing. I don't know if we will manage to the idea of having a real sort of first part of the discussion on the security issues, or on the, but I think that you're right. Again, I think that it's a little bit too much to say that there is a nuclear generation and there is no grid attached to it. But it is true that we need to be more strategic in our approach. And this is something on which we need to work. So I was a little bit less ambitious than you are in my 10 ideas for the the new High Representative. I was more thinking to something internal, let's say more bringing together institutions. But it is a suggestive idea that of having I don't know if every European Council, but from time to time, to have a discussion about which are the challenges that we need to face together. And on one thing, you are perfectly right. If there is one body that can look at all the different aspects and do the balancing and the decision making among the different components, it is the European Council. So it has to be there. I think that sometimes the process of the verticalization of decisions, of the verticalization of decision processes has become too pushed, because, I mean, too much goes up to chefs, to bosses, to the big boss, to our heads of state and government. But there are things where they are the only one that can provide a clear directions to the complexity of our machines. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Stefano, for engaging really with the full set of ideas, and also allowing me to indeed refer that this piece that we discussed this morning is indeed the complement that follows our contestation paper that you mentioned at the beginning, of which copies are outside. So anybody who hasn't got that one yet, please take one on the way out. A lot there to digest, and we will do so in a moment with all of you. But first, I think we need to discuss more the politics of it all. Sophie, what do you make of that?
Well, does this work? Yes.
It does.
Yes. Okay. Let me start by saying you welcomed me here and said that you were happy that I was here. I hope you're still going to be happy after my comments.
Let's see. Yeah.
Because I'm going to... Well, let me start with the bits that I very firmly agree with. First of all, I very much congratulate you on the initiative. I think this is a very timely debate, and I think it is you're touching upon all the important topics when it comes to the direction that you paint. I also very much support that, in particular the remarks about enlargement. I think the window of opportunity is closing, and the European Union, as usual, never misses an opportunity to shoot itself in the foot and keep countries waiting for decades, and in particular in the case of Ukraine. I mean, I think we are working with a process that was designed for the early 90s, you know, and the world of the early 90s and the EU of the early 90s. What makes us think that it still works? So I wholeheartedly agree with all those proposals. Where I would like to make a few critical remarks is on the governance bit. One sentence that you used in your introduction that I very much concur with was, drop things that no longer work. Very good idea. In my view, that would be the European Council.
Okay.
Because this is, and it's funny, no, that people, whenever you say we should do things in a different way, no longer, you know, exclusively intergovernmental, then people say, oh, but we have to be realistic. You know, it's pie in the sky, as you said, to think that we can do things differently. Sorry, it's pie in the sky to think that we can work with structures that were designed for European cooperation 60 years ago, 70 years ago. And it's very evidently not working. I mean, one of the topics that has not yet been addressed this morning was the situation in the Middle East. I mean, if there was one example of the European Union making a total pig's breakfast of its geopolitical strategy, it's the Middle East. It also shows that an intergovernmental governance does not work at all. I mean, that is pie. I see you go, no, it doesn't work. It simply doesn't work. And not just in the area of foreign policy and defense. It doesn't work in any area. And if you have a body, which, and incidentally, I'm very old-fashioned. I still believe in the treaties. And I believe that they are the constitutional framework that we have. But apparently it's completely out of fashion. But if you read the treaties, they actually say two things about the European Council. One is, it's not a legislative body. And two, it has to, I can't remember the exact word, something to design a strategy for the development of the European Union, something like this. So basically it's a think tank. But it's acting like a government. But a government which has no mandate, which is not accountable to anyone, which is not meeting and deciding in public, which cannot be scrutinized, and which is, you know, mainly busy horse trading in order to work their ways around the vetoes. And then if you look at the composition of the European Council, then I really wonder why we expect a council that is made up of national leaders, because, sorry, they're not European leaders. They're national leaders. They're many things, not European leaders, because they have one priority only, and it's, well, it's their re-election, and then it's their national interest as defined by themselves. But it's made up of, you know, the national leaders who are, in the best case, weak. We see the French government is weak, the German government is weak. Okay, we have a Spanish government which is, you know, which has the wafer thin majority, and the far right, you know, lurking in the corner. The Polish government, which has its hands more than full with undoing the damage of the previous government. Then we have a whole series of corrupted authoritarian governments in, you know, different grades, like Hungary, Slovakia, Bulgaria, we don't know because they're at their 7th election in 3 years' time. Romania, which has basically gone back to a one-party system. Belgium is actually fine because it has no government at the moment. The Netherlands is a government of puppets of the far-right Geert Wilders. Basically, you know, if you're looking for a Trojan horse of Putin, it's the European Council. So all these people are, and then there are many more examples. I mean, I cannot really think of one country where there's very strong, stable, democratic leadership and vision and courage for the future. So what makes us believe that if you put these 29 people in a room, they're going to come up with strong leadership for Europe? I think that is pie in the sky, quite frankly. And what I mean, if you look at surveys over the decades, but also at the outcome of the Conference on the Future of Europe, or indeed the ideas that have been put on the table by Mario Draghi, not for the economic affairs, but he also makes general remarks about the governance of the European Union. There is very strong support for a foreign and security policy where the European Union speaks with one voice. Abolish the veto. Now, and I think the last thing we need to do is create or transform the European Council, which is already not exactly the epitome of transparency, transform it into a Security Council that is going to meet behind closed doors. I think if we really want a strong common foreign and security policy that has public support, it has to become like the other policy areas. Decisions have to be taken in public. Of course, not, intelligence or military decisions or something like that. But your common policy should be like any other area of politics. And there's absolutely nothing, that we can expect from the European Council in that sense. So I do think it would be a lot more realistic if we want the European Union to remain relevant in the world of the future, to move away from the structures that have been designed for the 50s of the last century. Maybe one last remark here. The defense bit we've not talked about a whole lot, but there too. I mean, I can't remember. I think you said let's break the taboos. If we want a common European defense, if we want to be serious about that, then it actually has to be a defense policy. And the defense commissioner that everybody was talking about is essentially going to be an industry commissioner. And ramping up our production is not the same as defense. It's industry, which is also good, fine. I'm in favor of that. But let's not pretend that it's actual European defense. And if we want to move into that area, then we are going to need leaders who have the courage and the vision to think out of the box. And that, if I may be a little bit provocative, if you want out-of-the-box ideas, don't ask the box, So I think if you want to come up, I mean, I already mentioned the Conference on the Future of Europe. And then you can think, oh yes, but all these people are not experts. No, but they're citizens, They should actually be in the driver's seat. And they have very clearly said, we want a strong European Union speaking with a single voice that is able to provide security and stability and protect us. That's what people want. And we are not going to get that. We're not going to get leadership. We're not going to get stability from the European Council. So I think we need to have a completely different kind of governance. And we're not going to ask the government leaders, because they are going to be the last ones on this planet who are going to propose that we have to do it differently, because it's not in their interest. So if we really want to think out of the box, if we really want to change the position of the European Union in the world, then we have to have the courage to say, okay, we need very, very fundamental institutional changes. And if you'll allow me one last remark to also underline what I mean. We have all been watching the saga over the composition of the European Commission in recent weeks. And quite frankly, I'll go back to the treaties again. I don't know, does anybody ever read the treaties? Yes, no, it's on your bedside table? No? Okay. Well, there's some very important elements in there which are being completely ignored. One is the European Commission is independent, is not taking instructions from anyone. European commissioners are supposed to be independent. But what we have seen are, member states like a bunch of hyenas jumping on the European Commission and demanding a portfolio. And the interesting bit is that the leader of the Commission doesn't even counter that language, that narrative, as if portfolios are given to member state governments. They're not. They're not. And this not even creeping, rampant intergovernmentalism, it's a dead-end street. The European Union cannot function that way. The European Council doesn't function that way. The Commission doesn't function that way. And if we want Europe to remain relevant and strong, then we have to have the courage to make fundamental changes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Loud and clear. Just for the record, I mean, we write many things at the Institute, including on some of the points that you raised on QMV and how to organize defense, but not everything can find its way into the publication that we have this morning. And I'm in favor of QMV for a similar reason. But I also don't think we can wish away the role that the European Council does play, and how to make it work better, I think, is a relevant question. But we can turn to all of that in a moment. Before hearing from Ben, what do you think?
Well, thank you very much, Stephen. It's
Yeah.
quite a hard act to follow, Sophie. Yes. I suppose all I would say is that while a lot of what you just said, Sophie, is very persuasive, if we wait for treaty change to take effect and to be ratified, the Russians will be in Kiev. So we haven't got that much time to play with, I think. Stephen, I very much welcome your paper with all of your colleagues. I thought it was very well done, very crisply written, which is an editor's delight. Persuasive arguments. But I just want to focus on two questions. Russia and Ukraine and China, because those are going to be the issues that will define whether, as you put it, Europe is relevant or a bystander or a mere commentator on issues. And it seems to me that 3 years ago, you would say that the divisions over the threat perception of Russia were fundamental in Europe. They were the big divide, arguably, in the way Europe looked at the world. And obviously they have been, Russia's full-scale invasion has pretty much narrowed that divide, but it hasn't erased it completely, I think. And I think we're now at a point in the war where the divide is coming back, essentially in Europe, because European capitals have hidden behind a fairly empty mantra of supporting Ukraine for as long as it takes without actually spelling out what it means in strategic terms and the kind of commitment that they're willing to make. So we don't really know what as long as it takes means. We don't really know what getting Ukraine to a stronger position for negotiations means or how to do it, although I commend you for your paper on training. I think that's an excellent example of the kind of thing that we can do, but it's obviously only one part of the equation, and I'm sure you meant it as only one part of the equation. And then ultimately is, the other big question is, what is the EU's and Europe's role going to be in long-term security guarantees for Ukraine? Because if you do want some kind of negotiated settlement, it's all going to hinge on that, giving Ukraine the reassurances to be able to reach a settlement and giving sufficient deterrence to Russia. And I think on all of these questions, we don't have any answers. And I'm not even sure the discussion has properly started yet. That might be the number one item on your European Defence Council, Stephen. But it seems to me that Europe is at real risk of having events dictated to it by Washington in the months ahead. And even if it's not Trump, I think there's a pretty big possibility that Harris will also be pushing for some kind of negotiated settlement. What do we want out of that? How do we support that process? Do we want to offer an alternative? Are we willing to provide all of the financial support going forward that the Americans or Congress certainly won't want to provide? I think all of these questions, there just seems to be a depressing and rather dispiriting void in which there's nobody offering any answers right now, possibly for the reasons that you just said, given the multiple weaknesses in European capitals. The second one was China. And again, I thought there was a couple of very good, interesting papers, propositions in your document. But the big question to me is, what is the EU's leverage? And what are we willing to use? And it seems that the only real leverage we have is the reverse dependency that you talked about, Stephen, which is Europe's willingness to absorb China's industrial overcapacity. But it's very difficult to expect the EU to use that as leverage, as a weapon, given the sort of differential impact that happens. And we saw that last week or the week before when Sanchez goes to Beijing, and he disloyally talks down car tariffs. And clearly he and Scholz will now going to try and mount a rearguard action to unpick the car tariffs. And that's partly because, of course, China is still quite effective at dividing and ruling, perhaps not as effective as it was during the sort of 16+1 era, but it is pretty good at using economic coercion and the threat of tariffs on Spanish pork exports to bring this kind of to sow that kind of division and confusion. And I think we're so far away from Europe being able to use or being able to bear pain in order to be able to show a common front and use its leverage to try to bring home the costs to China of its potential aggression in Taiwan. The deterrence question that Stefano talked of. What is our deterrence? What is our leverage? And I don't think we really have an idea of what Europe is willing to contemplate in that regard.
No, fair enough.
I'll end it there.
Yeah, no, thanks very much, Ben, for those comments too. I agree. Of all the questions that are probably fundamental, and many of them are the Ukraine and the China-Russia one, feature very high. And analytically, I also agree. For this, you need political support from member states, which are subject to political developments now at home that make that very difficult. But our job as institute is to push, let's not fall into the trap of it's all too complicated and it's all, we'll just accept it. Our idea is to trigger discussions as we have this morning on in which fields can we move forward and how to do that. And this is where you also now come in. We have about 15 minutes, so let's try to get a few reactions, comments, questions. What do you make of it? On the totality of the set, I mean, you have the publication on your chair. You may have read the piece in the Financial Times, so I think you're well prepared. And there's Heather who wants to start, and there's a microphone that comes your way, Heather. From Bruegel, and you did a fantastic memo, Heather, I want to say, in the spirit of reciprocal think tank collaboration, memo for the incoming High Rep, how to prepare her for the harsher world. Heather, please.
Thank you very much. We're all full of great ideas, so Kaja Kallas could start her new job with a bang. I think there are two very fundamental problems that we haven't quite got into yet. So one is the one that Sophie began with, treaty change, because we all like to say, let's do the max with what we have, and then we'll do treaty change in the future and go for more fundamental reforms. But it's never going to happen. I mean, Ben just said the Russians will be in Kiev before that happens. Most importantly, the Russians have proxies in the European Union who will make sure there is no treaty change. They just won't ratify. It's quite easy for the Hungarian Prime Minister simply never to ratify a new treaty. We had enough trouble with the Lisbon Treaty. My confident prediction is we'll be here in 20 years' time. Stephen will be, of course, the High Rep by that point. Ben will be the editor of the Financial Times. Sophie will be the Prime Minister of the Netherlands. And we'll be still working with the Lisbon Treaty, despite Stefano's best attempts to write a new one. So, I think we should just give up on this idea. And that means we really have to put political will into maximising what we have. Now, this raises a very difficult conundrum because Ursula von der Leyen has just announced this new role of Defence Commissioner-ish, which is, as Sophie rightly pointed out, is this just going to be about procurement? Maybe so, but we need to define much more clearly the responsibilities. So what could we do, this is my question for you, given the current treaties which assign defence responsibilities to the High Rep, chairing the Council, being in charge of the European Defence Agency, there are things that are in the treaty, and the role is currently shrunken to less than the treaty sets out. Less, not more, but less. So how do we make it more than that? How do we make this vice president, I notice she's a vice president rather than an executive vice president, which isn't good news, but she's in the outer circle of the new diagram at least. But how can the High Rep make the most of the current treaty framework? That's my question for you. Second question is about threat perceptions, because what we haven't gone into is the fact that so few Europeans feel threatened at all. So are we prepared to spend money seriously on defence? Many Europeans do not feel that they themselves are threatened, even some that are actually in the east of the continent, or by Russia, and very few feel really threatened by China. China is still a source of cheap goods for most Europeans. So is it time to have some really scary charts? By the way, the graphics in this publication are fantastic. You've done really well on this. Is it time to set up some charts showing the map of Europe, how close Russian missiles are to Europe, how quickly they could come in? Not to scare people into there must be a settlement, but much more about waking people out of their complacency, because otherwise it's easy for the populists, and there are many in politics now who say, well, Putin is really not the problem. China is not really a problem, say the car makers. How do you change the idea in the population that we need to invest in this?
Many, many thanks. I'd like to take at least two more reactions. Please, a bit further to, yes, over there. If you can also briefly introduce yourself.
Thank you. André de Munter, European Parliament. I'm desk officer for Bosnia-Herzegovina and Turkey/Turkey. I've been reading with a lot of attention a number of chapters, and I want to focus in particular on the one drafted by Bojana, and congratulations, Bojana, for your work. There is a heavy focus there on the three EU candidates and NATO members, Albania, Montenegro, and North Macedonia. And you advocate their participation in the Foreign Affairs Council without voting rights, of course. My question would be then, do we not, by doing that, which is a laudable idea in itself, do we not risk deepening a rift within the Western Balkan countries with the three other countries, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Serbia and Kosovo, which are a major source overall of instability? And the second question related to that, there is a 10th enlargement country, Turkey. You wouldn't believe when looking at all kinds of statements since a year, Ursula von der Leyen completely forgot or deliberately did not mention Turkey in the entire State of the Union speech, not within the context of enlargement, not within any other context, be it transport, energy, etc. This is a country which also plays, despite its alarmingly low rate of alignment with CFSP, it plays an enormously important role, not in the least in the Black Sea region, where we also have two EU member states, NATO members, literal states, Bulgaria and Romania. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. At least one more colleagues who would like to come in right now. Yes, please. Veronique, on the aisle over there, please.
Thank you. Virginie de Ruyt from the Africa Directorate of DG for International Partnerships.
Yes, please.
Just a curiosity, did the partnership with Africa just not make the list, and was it the 11th topic? Or was it completely not a part of your discussions?
Okay. Thank you very much. I will try to answer quickly to some of these points, but then also look to the colleagues here to come in and complement. On Heather's sort of comments on treaty change and how to make the most of what we do have. And like you, Heather, I am in favor of a big high representative, of a strong high representative. I'm not in this business as long as Stefano, but I'm in this business for a while. And I remember that under the Barroso Commission, Cathy Ashton was really the number 2 in the Commission and sat next to the President. And when we had to sort out... He will give his perspective. We need I think we need a strong High Representative, Vice President in both its capacities. Also the Vice President role, and I think as you've been trying, Stefano, to bring the EEAS and the Commission closer together to achieve this policy coordination that we need across the board. And I hope very much that this new setup that is being concocted will allow that, and that the High Representative doesn't become the number 5 or 6. But has also maybe good personal relations that facilitate all of that, because I think Europe needs that. I think Europe needs a strong High Representative in both the High Rep and the VP role, and the same also applies therefore for the Defense Commissioner, which will be principally defense industry, one would imagine, but there are all sorts of links with hybrid and with cyber, and where, again, we will need to ensure that there is a better coordination among all these protagonists, and one can only hope from an overall European perspective that the, let's say, the personalities and the air in the room is allowing for that, perhaps more than was the case presently. On threat perceptions, Heather, my sense is that Europeans are scared, but they're scared about different things. And it matters if you live in the Baltic states or if you live in Lisbon. It matters where you come from. But there is and opinion polls point this out, there is a sense of insecurity in the air. And who is protecting me? I think citizens are asking then. And it's therefore for the European system in its totality, and in our well-known complications, to deliver solutions at the speed and the scale that citizens expect, and it's presently not doing so. And I think that's the name of the game of how to improve that. I'll let Bojana speak on the Balkans in a second, but just to allow us to talk about Turkey. We've done a lot of work at the Institute on Turkey, including mapping a little bit its role in regions of strategic importance to the European Union, what Turkey is doing in the Western Balkans, what it's doing in North Africa and Middle East, Central Asia, Indo-Pacific, Africa, of course. And you'll find copies of that, and it's very interesting to see how fast Turkey's footprint is growing in all these regions around the world. And it's I think also an opportunity for closer collaboration with Turkey, even if we know that the enlargement track is complicated. We have to invest in deeper cooperation with Turkey. And just finally on Africa, it's part very much of the plea we have for deeper partnerships with multiple countries around the world, and the gateway is part of it, but clearly not the totality of the answer. So let me stop here, but maybe Stefano, you wanted to respond, and then we'll ask the others.
Many things to say.
Yeah.
Try to be short. But if I may also to come to a couple of points that I've made before, and I'll try to really be short. First of all, and I think that there is a little bit in the air, what is the European Union? I mean, I think that somehow this is an element that we need to reflect upon, because I mean there are different conceptions, different visions of the European Union. And I would say that even in our citizenships, I mean, there are different ways of looking at that. And for me, the main point is who plays according to rules and who doesn't. That's the bottom line. Heather, it is true that they have problems in now with a specific country or more of a specific country. But let's remember that the constitution was killed by France and the Netherlands, not by Hungary or Slovakia. So it's a good reminder that the complexities are all over the European Union, and visions are different. And I'm sorry, the visions need to be reconciled in a way or another. I'm not a politician, I do another work, so I mean, I need to work with what I have. I think, Ben, to your point, true that I don't know if there is a complete lack of clarity about needs to be done when it comes to Ukraine. I think that it was the strongest possible decision that we have taken about Ukraine is enlargement. Is starting enlargement negotiations with it. And enlargements means a number of things. Means, let's say, integrating policies and so integrating in all different aspects. So it's not a light thing. I think that, and it is a serious decision. It's not something that is just to pay lip service to what was happening. I would be delighted at a certain point, and I think that this is not only something that we have to tell to the Europeans, that NATO would become the ultimate guarantee for Ukraine. But this is something that, again, that's why I mean, we Europeans, we tend to put a lot of blame and responsibilities on us. And we think that we are unable to do things. But when it comes to a number of decisions, this is true also for other parts of the world, I mean, including the most powerful country of the world. So it's just to keep in mind. I think that also on China, if I may, you are right, it's not easy to find the leverages for China. But the work that we have been doing for quite some time on China is not irrelevant. The conceptualization of economic security, all the measures that we have agreed to take, from anti-dumping to screening of foreign direct investments and so on, this is part of the story. All the minilateral activities that we have undertaken in the Indo-Pacific area and beyond is part of that story, and including the reputational element that for China is not relevant is also part of that story. The work that we are doing in Africa with the different partnerships is part of that story. It's not a one silver bullet. It's a complex strategy which is made of many things, which has to increase our capacity of deterrence. I won't go on treaty changes. I think that, I mean, it's a very interesting discussion if you want to have it. I don't think that is part of in this moment, is part of the story. And maybe, I mean, the point is not about changing treaties, but it's about the political will of implementing the treaties, because there is a lot already in there. I said it before, I repeat once again, let's look at the mission letters, because that will be interesting. I'm not very much interested if it is the first, the second, or the third vice president of the Commission, to be honest. And with all due respect, I don't think that Ashton, being the first vice president of the Commission, has played the role of vice president of the Commission. So it's a, sorry, hard judgment, but it is what I think. I think that there is a point to see if there is a real will of the High Representative to be and to play this role as Vice President of the Commission, which depends on many things, including of the relationship with the President of the Commission. But the instruments are there, the group of Commission for the External Relations, the role of coordination, and so on. And I think that there is a very strong argument for this to happen now, because, I mean, at the time when the High Representative was created with the Lisbon Treaty, it was easier to make a distinction between internal and external. It was easy to define, let's say, the border between what is the internal policies. Now it's much more difficult. Call it however you want to call it, weaponization, instrumentalization of policies, what is happening in cyber, what is happening in energy, what is happening in migration. It's something that is not longer allowing us the luxury to say, this is the border, this is mine, this is yours. Sure. Like it is a sort of zero-sum game, where essentially you are taking out responsibility from one side to the other. I think that we need to be all, I hope, responsible and grown up enough to think that exactly for what you were saying, Heather, because the threat is there, we need to make it sure that we are able to respond and to contribute to that. Because, I mean, what is honestly the tough battle that you see around Rond-Point-Schuman, nobody cares less when you get out of this center. It's nobody. I mean, it's not even, I would say, in other parts of Brussels, let alone in other parts of Europe. And I mean, and I know, I mean, it's a lot of time I've been presenting as the Secretary General of the External Action Service of the Commission. what, do I start explaining, look, no, I'm a service, I'm independent, I'm not a commission? You take it. I mean, it's okay. I mean, I'm part of an institutional setup. I mean, provided they understand which is the work that I'm doing, it's fine with me if it's not treaty-wise correct. There is a point, and on this, on the contrary, I think you're right about the threat perception. And that's a delicate issue because you see that the leaders are willing to raise this point up to a level, but they do not want to scare. They do not want to give the sense that we are on the verge of a war or that we are on the verge of major problems. And it's a little bit our responsibility, and I think that from that point of view, I have to pay tribute to what President von der Leyen has done, because she has squarely put security at the heart of the work of this commission. Military, we'll see, I mean, what is again, I mean, if it's just the defense component or it's more than that, I think that it's more, but then it has to be integrated also with the other parts of the house. The economic security and the whole of society security. We will see what is coming out of the Minister report of what we will be doing with this. I think that there is an issue which is there, and now I'm speaking more for the External Action Service. We need to make also our part of the job, because our last threat assessment was unfortunately published 2 weeks after the Russian invasion against Ukraine, and essentially prepared months before this was happening. So it has to be, I would say, substantially revised to take into account what is in there. But there is one point, and I think that we have to be all aware of: security as a cost. Doesn't come with no cost attached to it. To create redundancy, to multiply the supply chains, to diversify them, to create defense structures and mechanisms, it's something that it's a hell of a work. I mean, now I see that there are some military also in the room. Now, essentially, the industrial military sector works on the basis of orders. So first you order, and then they produce, which means that essentially there are delays of months if everything goes okay. We need to change this. I mean, I'm not saying that we have to enter into a war economy state of mind, but we need to become much more articulated also from that point of view. Africa will remain very important, don't worry.
Thank you very much, Stefano. Indeed, I echo the point on the need to invest in security. You can't just express a wish for it, but you need to pay a price, politically, financially, in other terms, organizationally, and the cost of inaction. But first, a few more reactions from Sophie and Ben, and I'll ask finally Bojana to close on the Balkans, please.
Yes. Thank you. Well, first of all, I realize that I've created a misunderstanding. I wasn't arguing for treaty change, and certainly not treaty change before we have a common policy. I do want treaty change in the end. Now, I was actually arguing for the correct and full application of the existing treaties, because that's not happening anymore. That's the whole point. The European Council is going completely outside the treaties. It's doing things for which it has no mandate. It doesn't have the powers. It's exceeding its powers. And it's not doing a very good job. You know, I'm not saying that treaty change is the solution to the problem. No, I think that we should apply the rules that we have, because that would actually strengthen the European Union. It would strengthen the hand of the High Representative. I have to say, I'm actually very pleased myself with the choice of Kaja Kallas, somebody who understands the threat of Russia. I mean, other parts of the world are something else, but at least this. I think we can move to QMV, we can. I think, you know, the Commission can be more independent. I mean, if you really fully want to apply the existing treaties and not have treaty change, then we should actually reduce the size of the Commission and make it more independent from the member states. It's in the treaties, it's in the Lisbon Treaty. But the point is that what is happening at the moment is that there is a kind of unofficial creeping treaty change, because the treaties are being disregarded. When you're talking about relations with Tunisia, for example, or Turkey, they're inventing all sorts of instruments and structures that don't exist. Team Europe, that went to Tunisia to negotiate, does not exist. It's not in the treaties. It's not anywhere. The so-called Turkey deal was not a deal. I always like to stress it has the same legal status as a beer coaster. Somebody, challenged the thing in court, and the European Court of Justice said, sorry, we cannot rule on this because it doesn't exist. So let's stick to the treaties, okay? And then we can talk maybe about treaty change in the future. But let's apply the treaties because it will actually give us a stronger hand. Because you said, as an argument against treaty change, you said, well, because it will slow things down. I hope that you now understand. I wasn't arguing for treaty change, but about the issue of Europe being too slow and too weak. I mean, we have shifted so much power to the European Council, and that is where the delays take place. That is where there are countries that are sabotaging, undermining, slowing down, blocking. It's Viktor Orban, but he's not the only one. Others are doing it too. They're just a bit less loud than he is. Or they're getting all their exceptions. I mean, sanctions. It's the member states that are supposed to apply the sanctions. Well, look at the results, and then you have to conclude they're not doing it. They're not doing it. How do all the Western parts find their way into Russian military equipment? It's not by magic. It's because the sanctions are not being applied because it doesn't suit the national economic interests. So I keep saying, I think it is pie in the sky to think that we can continue on this path of ever greater intergovernmentalism, a power grab by national government leaders. It's not member states, it's government leaders. It is very problematic in many areas. I mean, when you're talking about we need to have more leverage, Europe was, maybe still is, an economic powerhouse, but we're in decline. We're in decline. And I mean, I think it has been set out very, very clearly in the reports of Letta and Draghi. And then if I see the reaction of the Commission and the Council going, oh yeah, well, thank you very much. This will be binned. You'll hear from us. I mean, the message, Draghi put it in very urgent language. It's very clear. If we continue on this same path, then what did he say? It's going to be slow agony. And that applies to all the policy areas. What makes us believe that foreign policies and defense, security are any different? This model simply doesn't work anymore. And yes, we'll have to do with it for the time being, but let's then at least apply the treaties because they do give us the tools to act in the present. But yes, we also need to contemplate change for the future. And the final remark is on the threat perception. There's also because I do think people do feel threatened, and of course it all depends a little bit on where you live, but there's also the other threat perception, which is being spread by, let's say, the friends of Putin, saying, oh, don't provoke him. Because there's going to be he's going to lash out, and we are NATO has provoked him, and it's jeopardizing our safety. That's also a narrative that's being peddled by some of his allies. But let's not be the hostage of the past and the present and national interests. But let's have a vision for a stronger Europe.
Thank you very much, Ben. Your final thoughts.
Couple of very quick points, actually, in response to Heather's question. It would seem to me that a bigger problem, as Stefano suggested, is a lack of money than treaty constraints or lack of powers. I mean, there's a massive difference between a European defence industry commissioner with a budget of 1 billion and one with 100 billion. Yes. And that could make a huge impact to European security, or it could have absolutely no impact whatsoever, or very, very marginal impact, just on the basis of money. Second thought about the threat perception of China, not a military threat, but I wonder whether the economic threat is now, whether we're at a bit of a tipping point. And there's probably nothing better than to bring it home to German opinion than a closure of 2 Volkswagen factories.
Corporate Germany.
in the country that matters most on the China question. But let's see how that pans out.
Thanks very much for those pungy points, and you made my point on German corporate. Bojana, can you say something on the Balkans and whether we're splitting them with your plan?
Sure, Andre, thanks for the question.
Yes.
Indeed, I nominate Albania, North Macedonia, and Montenegro in my chapter, which happen to be also member states. It's very important fact that since 2014 and Russia's annexation of Crimea, they have significantly increased their military spending, and they now dedicate actually a higher percentage of GDP than 14 EU member states, which is more than half. But there is something more important, and that is CFSP alignment, which Secretary General Sannino mentioned. They have 100% of track record throughout the years. And if we compare it with other candidate countries, then I think that should be rewarded. And in terms of the ripe and the divide, unfortunately, I think the ripe is already there. Because if we take some programs and agencies that these countries have access to, for instance, I can think of Digital Europe program, 7.5 billion between the period 2021-2027. Not all of the candidates are in. Only Albania, North Macedonia, Serbia, and Montenegro. Just recently, Frontex signed a cooperation agreement with Serbia, and there are already cooperation agreements with Albania, North Macedonia, Montenegro. Again, Horizon Europe, all the candidates are there. But the point, in fact, is that we already have that divide, and even when talking about the potential candidates to enlarge sooner rather than later, we still have different camps. So unfortunately, we have created that divide. And my last thought is that while all these candidates have access to certain programs and agencies, it's not the same to institutionally benefit from the EU single market and actually have a seat at the table. Because we need to, in a way, stop looking at these countries as a problem, but as part of the solution. This is what I try to aim for in my chapter. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bojana, for that. And I think that sort of captures the spirit of what we try to do with this exercise, put ideas on the table to make the system and Europe perform better, both on the what and the how. Thank you very much for joining. We've run out of time. I want to thank Stefano, Sophie, and Ben for joining us, and we remain ready for discussion informally after the event. But thanks, and see you next time at the next EUISS event.